The guard's badge hit the floor first. Then the gun. Then the truth. Federal agents moved fast, hands grabbing arms, voices loud and sharp. Inmates froze. Other guards stepped back, shocked and confused. No one spoke as a man in uniform was pushed against the wall. His name was Mark Reynolds. He was a federal prison guard, and he had just been caught smuggling more than drugs. It happened during morning count. The prison was loud like always. Doors buzzed open and shut. Radios crackled. Inmates stood by their bunks, eyes forward. Mark walked a tier like he had done 1,000 times before. Same boots, same keys, same calm face. Then an inmate dropped a note on the floor. A tiny slip of paper. A signal. At the end of the tier, a supervisor nodded once. That was all it took. Agents came through the door, wearing jackets that didn't belong there. Yellow letters across the back. Federal investigation. Mark's face went pale. Mark Reynolds, one agent said, "You're under arrest." For a second, no one moved. Then the cuffs clicked shut. That was the highest peak. Because when they searched Mark, they didn't just find pills. They found phones. They found flash drives. They found sealed envelopes with names written inside. Names that belonged to people outside the prison. People who were supposed to be safe. And suddenly, everyone understood this wasn't just about drugs. 3 years earlier, Mark Reynolds was proud of his job. He was 34 years old. Married. 1 kid. He wore his uniform clean and straight. He followed rules. He showed up early. Working at a federal prison paid steady money. Benefits. Respect. Mark told people, "I keep bad guys locked up." At first, that felt true. The prison was strict. Cameras everywhere. Procedures for everything. Mark learned how to search cells, how to watch hands, how to read faces. That was a low part, but a safe one. Boring. Predictable. Inmates tested him. "Hey, boss," they'd say. "You look tired. Bet you could use extra cash." Mark ignored it. For a while. Then life outside got harder. His wife lost her job. Bills stacked up. His car broke down. His son needed braces. Mark started working extra shifts. That's when Eddie Brooks noticed him. Eddie was an inmate, mid-30s. Calm. Smart. He never caused trouble. He always knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. One day, Eddie spoke softly as Mark passed the cell. "You ever think about how easy this place runs on trust?" Eddie asked. Mark stopped. "Face the wall," he said. Eddie did, but the word stuck. Trust. Weeks later, Mark caught Eddie with contraband candy. Not serious. Just enough to write him up. Eddie smiled. "I didn't mean to put you in a spot." Mark sighed. "You know the rules." Eddie nodded. "I do. That's why I don't break them much." That was the first crack. The first thing Mark smuggled wasn't drugs. It was a note. Eddie asked him to deliver it to another unit. "Just a message to my cousin," he said. Mark hesitated. "It's harmless," Eddie added. "No trouble." Mark did it. Nothing happened. No alarms. No punishment. That made it easier the second time. Then the third. That was a low stretch. Quiet. Slippery. The drugs came later. Pills at first. Small ones. Easy to hide. Eddie paid Mark through a friend on the outside. Cash appeared in Mark's account, labeled as loan repayment. Mark told himself it was temporary, just until things got better. But things never do that on their own. Soon, Eddie asked for phones. "Just for calls," he said. "Nothing bad." Mark knew that was a lie. Phones meant control. Phones meant power. Phones meant crimes happening beyond the walls. Mark said no. For a day. Then Eddie said something that changed everything. "You know your wife's schedule," Eddie said calmly. "I could help keep her safe." Mark's blood ran cold. That was the extreme moment. The one you don't forget. From then on, Mark wasn't in control. He smuggled phones taped inside lunch bags. Flash drives hidden in boots. Envelopes slipped into trash carts. The prison stayed calm. Too calm. Inmates followed rules more closely. Fight stopped. Order increased. Supervisors praised the unit. Mark felt sick. because he knew why it was quiet. Someone else was running things. The worst thing Mark smuggled wasn't drugs or phones. It was information, schedules, shift changes, guard names. Outside, things happened. A witness missed court. A man disappeared. A family was threatened. Mark didn't see it, but he felt it. Every night, the investigation started small. Missing items, odd patterns, too much order. An inmate talked, then another. Then Eddie slipped. He trusted someone who wanted out. That's how the note hit the floor during count. That's how the supervisor nodded. That's how Mark Reynolds' badge hit the concrete. As agents pulled him away, an inmate whispered, "It was never just drugs." Mark knew, and as the doors closed behind him, he realized the worst part wasn't prison. It was knowing what would come next. Because if the truth came out, he wasn't the only guard involved. Mark Reynolds spent his first night in a holding cell staring at the ceiling. No uniform, no badge, no keys, just gray walls and a metal bench. For the first time in years, he was on the other side of the bars. That was a low moment, a deep one. The next morning, 2 federal investigators came in, a man named Agent Thomas Keller and a woman named Agent Maria Lewis. They carried folders thick with papers. They sat across from Mark and didn't rush. "You know why you're here," Keller said. Mark nodded. His mouth was dry. Lewis slid photos across the table. Phones, flash drives, cash transfers, prison camera stills showing Mark in places he shouldn't have been. "We know about the drugs," she said. "We know about the phones." Mark stayed quiet. Keller leaned forward. "What we want to know is what else you moved." Mark swallowed, because this was the part he feared most. Inside the prison, things were falling apart fast. Eddie Brooks was pulled from his cell in the middle of the night. Other inmates watched as he was taken away in cuffs. No shouting, no resistance, just a small smile from Eddie as he walked past. That smile scared people, because Eddie wasn't just an inmate. He was a hub. Without him, the network inside the prison started to shake. Men who had power suddenly didn't. Phones went quiet. Orders stopped coming. And when power disappears in prison, violence usually follows. Back in the interview room, Mark finally spoke. "I didn't plan this," he said. "It started small." Lewis nodded. "It always does." Mark told him everything. The notes, the pills, the phones. Then he paused. "There's more," he said. Keller's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "I moved information," Mark said. "Guard schedules. Transfer dates." Lewis closed her eyes for a second. "You knew people could get hurt," she said. Mark shook his head, tears forming. "I knew they already were." That was a high moment. Extreme. Final. Because once those words were said, there was no turning back. Outside the prison, arrests began quietly. Not announced. Not flashy. Former inmates were picked up. Outside associates questioned. Phones traced. Money followed. The crime network wasn't just selling drugs. They were running scams. Witness intimidation. Identity theft. Even planning crimes from inside prison walls. And Mark Reynolds had been the door. Mark was offered a deal. Not freedom. Protection. "If you cooperate fully," Keller said, "you might survive prison." That word hung in the air. Survive. Mark thought of his wife, his son. Their faces burned in his mind. "I'll talk," he said, "but I'm already dead in there." Lewis nodded. "That's why you won't be going back." Witness protection inside prison. Protective custody. Isolation. Another low stretch. Inside protective custody. Time slowed again. Mark was alone. Meals through a slot. No contact. No news. But he could hear things. Shouting in distant units. Lockdowns. Searches. The prison was tearing itself open. Guards were suspended. One resigned. Another was escorted out in cuffs just like Mark had been. He wasn't alone after all. That realization was terrifying. One night, Mark was moved again. This time to a federal courthouse. He wore an orange jumpsuit now. As he walked past holding cells, He heard someone whisper his name. He didn't look. He couldn't. In court, the judge read charges that seemed endless. Conspiracy, bribery, smuggling, obstruction. Mark's knees shook. He pleaded guilty. That was another extreme moment, because now the story was official. A federal prison corruption scandal. And Mark Reynolds was at the center of it. The media exploded. Guard smuggles contraband into federal prison. Phones, drugs, and corruption behind bars. But the headlines missed something. They didn't mention the witnesses who vanished, the families who were threatened, the crimes planned in secret. They didn't mention the files Mark had moved. And those files were the most dangerous part of all. Late one night, Agent Lewis visited Mark. "We found something," she said. "What?" Mark asked. "A list," she replied. "Names, locations." Mark's heart dropped. "That wasn't supposed to leave the prison," he said. Lewis nodded. "It did." And Mark asked, "And someone high up wants it buried." That sentence changed everything, because now this wasn't just about inmates and guards. It was about how far the corruption went, and whether the truth would survive long enough to come out. Mark Reynolds sat alone in a small federal holding room, staring at his hands. They shook. Agent Lewis's words kept replaying in his head. Someone high up wants it buried. Mark finally understood how deep this went. This wasn't just one bad guard. This wasn't just one inmate network. This was a system problem, and he had helped feed it. The list was real. It had names of people outside the prison, business owners, middlemen, family members, even one former prison contractor. Mark had smuggled that list out without knowing what it truly was. He thought it was just contacts. It was a map of a crime network that used the prison like a control room. Phones gave orders. Drugs paid debts. Information kept everyone afraid. And Mark had been the bridge. That was the lowest moment of all. The next day, federal agents moved fast. They didn't announce it. They didn't warn anyone. Search warrants were served before sunrise. Offices were searched. Homes were entered. Computers seized. People who thought they were untouchable suddenly weren't. Inside the prison, everything changed. Units were locked down. Staff were questioned. Cameras were reviewed all the way back. One supervisor disappeared from the schedule. Then another. No explanations. Just silence. Mark was brought in again. This time, more agents were in the room. A man in a dark suit spoke first. "Mr. Reynolds, your cooperation just expanded this case." Mark looked up. "Am I helping or am I just a fall guy?" The man didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You're helping, but that doesn't erase what you did." Mark nodded. "I know." He told them everything. Every name he remembered. Every package. Every threat. He didn't leave anything out, because there was no point anymore. That was the final high moment. The full truth. The indictments came weeks later. Multiple guards. Outside criminals. Former contractors. The headlines changed. Federal prison corruption scandal expands. Smuggling ring ran beyond prison walls. Eddie Brooks was sentenced again. This time for life. He never smiled in court. Mark watched the hearing on a small TV from protective custody. He felt no relief. Only wait. Mark was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Not the one he worked at. A different one. Far away. Before he was transferred, Agent Lewis visited him one last time. "You stopped something bigger," she said. Mark shook his head. "I helped start it." Lewis nodded. Both can be true. Years later, Mark sat in a small cell, counting days the way inmates always do. He didn't expect forgiveness. He didn't ask for it. He wrote letters to his son. Simple ones. Honest ones. "I made bad choices," he wrote, "and they hurt people." The prison stayed quiet around him. Phones didn't ring at night anymore. That mattered. The guard who smuggled more than drugs lost everything. His job, his freedom, his name. But his actions exposed a crime network that hid behind uniforms and locked doors. That was the scandal. Not just what he carried in, but what he let grow. And in the end, The truth didn't stay smuggled forever.